So Ms. Marvel, the latest MCU Disney Plus show, just had its finale, and there's a good chance you didn't know that because most people haven't been watching this show. Unlike Morbius, where fans either never saw it or did see it and realized it was bad and started making fun of it, Ms. Marvel is interesting because it's gotten pretty good reviews, but most people just haven't tuned in to watch the show.
I'm the world's greatest superhero.
You're my greatest failure.
There's a lot of variables that probably factored into its poor viewership performance, and I think it's important to recognize that low viewership does not necessarily mean that a show is bad. For starters, the marketing for this show painted it as being aimed at a younger audience, and when you consider that the show dropped after Moon Knight, it's just a very big departure in tone and maturity. Now that we're several years away from any big crossover or in-game level event, Marvel is going back to origins for new characters, and the fact is that not every new character is going to draw in the same number of eyes. Prior to their respective shows being released, I was familiar with Moon Knight and Ms. Marvel on about an equal level, and for most casual viewers, I suspect that's probably true as well. I think how Ms. Marvel was presented through the marketing, and for many people it may have just been a sheer lack of marketing, has contributed to this show being skipped by most people. As you may have noticed from the title, I didn't watch Ms. Marvel. At first. I've watched every MCU Disney Plus show week by week, and in the case of Loki, I was up till 3 AM to watch. In the case of Ms. Marvel, I just didn't. I knew I wasn't the target audience for this show, and I knew it wouldn't change the status quo of the MCU, so I just didn't feel the need to keep up week by week. Instead, this is the first series where I watched them all in one day. I thought it would be nice to make an honest and nuanced review for those who have either been on the fence about starting the show, or to confirm worries for those who have no intention of ever starting it. So, is this show bad? The simple answer is no. It's not bad, but your mileage may vary. The core structure of Kamala Khan's superhero origin is not new by any means, but like many retellings, it does so through a story that tries to be grounded and be faithful and respectful to a different culture, tradition, and history. Kamala and her family are Pakistani Muslims, and her family's history and culture are very key parts of this show. I'm neither Pakistani nor Muslim, so I'm curious to hear what someone who is thought of the show's depiction and portrayal. I'm not gonna act like it's absurd that Marvel has decided to introduce a Muslim superhero. I mean, Muslim people exist in real life. There's almost 2 billion in the world. And I don't think it's too much to ask for little boys and girls to have at least one hero they can relate to and look up to. I'm pretty sure that's the target audience for this show. And as someone who looks like Draco Malfoy and anyone else with blonde hair and blue eyes, I'm very clearly not in that demographic. But I'll be honest with you guys. I need you all to trust me here. This show is not bad. And there were things here that I enjoyed. The show has an interesting visual flair, and the visuals utilized in the earlier episodes felt like a live-action version of Spider-Verse. The earlier episodes deal with Kamala in her hometown and at school with her family and friends, and while it is definitely cheesy or unengaging at times, it's by no means bad. I think Iman Vellani is a great addition to the MCU, and she has all the charisma and charm that a new character like herself needs. In the same way that Robert Downey Jr. was made to play Iron Man, I honestly think Iman Vellani was made to play Ms. Marvel. If you watch her in interviews, she is so happy to be in this position, and she seems in awe that everything happened the way it did for her. I say she was born to play Ms. Marvel because she is actually a huge comics nerd and was a big fan of Ms. Marvel as a kid. Her getting the role fresh out of high school after being sent the casting call through WhatsApp by a relative is really neat, and I feel bad her show is not doing very well. The supporting cast is doing a pretty decent job too, and it comes across like they all had a good time making this show, and that can sometimes rub off on the viewer, but for some people it just won't, and that's okay. I really like Kamala's friend Bruno, and he gives off very strong Peter Parker vibes. Tom Holland Peter Parker vibe, specifically.
Theoretically, it's possible. For sure possible to achieve interdimensional travel, but you need the base energy of the sun, pretty much. But what I realize is that all of these theoretical problems downplay the margin of error. And if you need the energy of the sun, think about how big the margin of error must be.
Like I said before, the origin story structure is recycled through a new lens as her daily life is all the more unique thanks to her religion, culture, and customs. Moon Knight did show that Mark Spector was Jewish, but if you didn't notice the symbolism or him wearing a kippah, then it would never have been all that apparent to you. But Ms. Marvel spends a lot of time focusing on her family's history, which is full of fantastical marvels and ancient magic. I'm always open to exploring the MCU through a diverse lens so long as it's done right, and this show and the end result work for me. Before the show enters its main arc in later episodes, we get to spend more time with average people in the MCU, and I always like seeing the world from their perspective. This show takes us to the very first ever Avenger Con, which I just find hard to believe never was a thing before, but there's lots of Easter eggs and references for you to enjoy here. There's not a whole lot of action in this show, but when there is, it's MCU standard stuff. It's certainly not on Shang-Chi's level. The humor in this show is also very MCU standard, especially when it stars teenagers. I wasn't all that tickled by it, but it's passable. I already praised the visual and stylistic flair in the series, and it's complemented by directing that is fine, but sometimes the editing is just questionable.
No!
We have to help him.
Mala, it's too late.
You have powers too?
My main gripe with the show is that the latter half just didn't really work for me. This feels like two shows combined into one. You have Kamala in New Jersey with her friends and family, but then you have the mythical protagonist and antagonist from and in Pakistan, the latter half of which is filled with an ungodly amount of exposition for Kamala's family and the origins of her powers. The only thing I liked here was how it dealt with generational trauma as a result of brutal British occupation of India and Pakistan's history, but if world history isn't your thing, you probably won't care. And that kinda sucks because this is everything that the show leads up to. As far as finales go, I really don't think that this one was that bad. We finally get to go back to Kamala's friends and family in New Jersey, which was arguably the better part of the show. And it's about as cheesy as I had expected just based on how the tone was set from the beginning. Kamala's about the same age as Peter Parker was when he was introduced in the MCU, but I think her being a massive fan of Captain Marvel, and then unlocking powers that will match up with her in the future, has at least some potential. If I had to use one word to describe this show, it would be harmless. Miss Marvel will return in The Marvels, which comes out next summer, and I don't know how much you will have missed out on by then if you don't watch the show, but I don't think there's any harm in giving it a try. If you keep up with all things MCU, I'm sure you've either seen the show just out of feeling compelled to, or because you actually enjoyed it, and that's great. I kinda take it that everyone who is a fan of Captain Marvel or excited for The Marvels already makes up the people who actually watch this show, so that just leaves people who either have no desire to watch it or are still on the fence about starting it. If you have nothing better to do, I don't see the harm in giving it a shot. You may love it, or you may not like it at all. If understanding everything in the theatrical films is important to you and you still have not watched this show, then obviously I think you should watch it. It doesn't change the status quo of the MCU, but the finale does confirm something really big for the character of Miss Marvel. But it's a big spoiler, so I won't say what it is here. You can watch the show for yourself or just look it up. If you aren't already a big Marvel fan, I can't imagine that this is the show that gets you pulled into the MCU, unless you're in that impressionable target audience. It's harmless, sometimes actually enjoyable, has decent potential, but kinda squashed that in the middle episodes, but by the end, I wouldn't say I regretted watching it. If you have nothing better to do and want to give it a try, I think it's an alright idea. So, I'm going to give Miss Marvel a 6 out of 10.